This book is about Christmas, and I began it back in the pandemic, the earliest days. And I thought, when they were asking me to do it, I said, 2 years of Christmas? I don't think I can handle it. It's like sucking candy canes all that time or something. It's just too much. But as I got into it, I got to like it a lot more. I do like Christmas, but I only like certain aspects of it, the good parts of it. The problem I'm having with this event, or with this book, is that some of the libraries I talk to, like I'll be speaking at the main library in Detroit in the next couple weeks, they think it's a kid's book. They think it's, it's Christmas in Detroit, so kids must love that, right? It's not a kid's book, it's a history book for adults. And the kids, immediately their attention just goes somewhere. And I've also had the fear that I'm going to spoil some little kid's Christmas because I talk about Santa Claus and kind of the industry of Santa Claus and how it all developed and how it works today. And so I have a lot of times an alternative presentation that I have in my pocket in case I see a lot of children out in the audience. But it's a problem. Christmas in Detroit is unique from other Christmases in the United States in that, of course, Detroit started as a French city. The Protestants in America didn't accept Christmas. They said it's not in the Bible. There's no evidence that Jesus was born in December or any of that stuff, so we don't accept it. And they didn't recognize it. But certainly the French did. The French had a long history with Christmas, and so probably, the city was founded in 1701, so probably Christmas or December of 1701, they were thinking about just this very same thing. French Christmas really begins on Christmas Eve. Here is, they celebrate, of course, Joyeux Noël. Christmas when Detroit was French is when it really begins. But they begin on Christmas Eve, and where the whole family goes off to, this is the third version of St. Anne's, built in 1816 until 1876, when the new version down by the bridge was open for business. But this was downtown back then, and all the people, the French people would gather their things and go to church in carts or walk or whatever in the midnight. And it was really a time of mysticism, mystery, and there was a lot of superstitions that went along with it. It was much more mystical than the kind of Christmas we see today. And a very special time. The first thing, after they would be done with Christmas Mass, they would come home, and the first thing they would do was bring the Yule log into the fireplace. They would drag the big Yule log. And it always had to be started with a piece of the Yule log from last year, or you didn't get the benefits of the good luck and protection from storms and things like that the Yule log brought you. But the evening, as I said, was one of mystery. The mothers usually, and probably other females, would begin making the réveillon, which is the feast, the family feast on Christmas Eve for celebration. But as they were cooking, perhaps, the mother would say 1,000 Hail Marys. And the reason was that they also put a candle in the window, because it was believed that the Virgin Mary was wandering around outside the houses, looking in to make sure everything was okay, I suppose. But she would say 1,000 Hail Marys that would bring good luck to her husband, or special benefits or need for her children, and things like that. Also, as the evening went on, the animals in the barn gained the ability to speak, which was French. You probably spoke French a lot better than I speak French. But they would probably talk about the farmer and his cold hands or something like that. I don't know. But they always, they would speak French. And at midnight, it was believed Jesus was born at midnight. So the animals were all knelt in the barn in reverence for the baby Jesus. And here's a beautiful picture from Quebec of a woman who did these animals. Other things were also occurring. the treasures of the earth were revealed to some people. That would be, the earth would open up and show gold or diamonds and maybe nowadays lithium or something, but that's what they did. The girls would have this procedure where they would drip melted lead into a bowl, through a ring into a bowl. What could possibly go wrong with that? And it would make shapes which they would interpret for their future husband, his name and whether he was going to be handsome and successful and things like that. It sounds like a really risky thing to do. That's what they did. Finally, they had, the Christmas began with Christmas Eve's Réveillon, the revival feast, which was a family affair. I've made a few of the dishes. One of them is called a torture, which is a meat pie made with game, or sometimes pork as well, in chunks. And it's highly spiced with Christmas spice. So it has mace and allspice and ginger and things like that, cinnamon. But it's very good, really very good. The kids' Christmas didn't occur until the following week, would be New Year's Eve. And the kids' Christmas, originally they believed that Jesus, the baby, brought the presents to the kids. They would put their shoes in front of the fireplace, and then they would wake up and there would be a toy or a coin or something like that. And but later on, after things continued, they believed it was Père Noël who brought the gifts. And they would leave a treat for Guy, his donkey. Guy means mistletoe. And here's the great man. He's got a tennis racket. I don't know who's going to want that. He's got a big load of stuff for the children. Of course, he didn't go by himself. He had help. And that was this devilish-looking guy, Father Père Foutard, the old man whipper. And Père Foutard dealt with the kids that were naughty, and he had a little whip, and he'd give them a whack. Or the really bad ones, he'd put in the basket like those kids and cart them off for all eternity to hell. I mean, there's a lifetime of therapy there. I don't know what else would cause it, but I don't know how bad can you be? They didn't wash their hands or something for dinner? I don't know, but those kids are obviously scared out of their wits. Yeah, that little girl's holding her head. Ow. I guess that was bad. But that's the way Christmas was back then. It was really a lesson for children in Christianity or religion. Good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. Good children get a treat, and bad children get bothered and tired, or maybe carted off for all eternity to hell. Now, the Protestant Christmas was unusual. In England, they did celebrate Christmas, but there was a much bigger issue of practical jokes and being funny and having fun. And these are two Christmas cards from Victorian England. As you can see, this one's a dead bird. May yours be a joyful Christmas. This one, may good digestion and weight and appetite. Weight and appetite. Anyway, obviously you wouldn't want to get a dead bird for Christmas, but that was kind of the fun thing about Christmas. Christmas in general began in Rome as a holiday called Saturnalia, which was, I don't know if it's typical Rome, but people got drunk and cross-dressed and did all kinds of crazy, stupid things and had fun, I guess. And as time went on, the Christians began taking over. They took over Saturnalia and said, let's make this a little different. And they gave it a Christian slant. But still, the Protestants in England and America weren't really very keen on a religious end of Christmas. That was until these three fellows, this is Washington Irving and Clement Clark Moore and Charles Dickens, in the early 19th century, changed things around. And Washington Irving is, of course, the author of The Headless Horseman and Rip Van Winkle. He was a Dutch writer from upstate New York, but he was very popular in England. And one of his books, he wrote 3 chapters about Christmas in England, in which a Squire Bracebridge, who has a manor, announces that we're going to have a different Christmas this year. Instead of drinking and carousing and acting idiotic, we're going to be nice to each other, we're going to make children laugh, we're going to have a feast, we're going to give gifts, all of that stuff. And Irving just made that up. He was just completely made up. But people in England loved the notion of it so much that they started actually celebrating Christmas in that spirit. Sometime later in the 1820s, Clement Clark Moore, who lived in New York, his family had a farm just north of Greenwich Village, which is now Chelsea. And he was an archaic language scholar at Episcopalian Church. But for his 2 daughters, he wrote a poem, which he called A Visit from St. Nicholas, but we know as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And it was a completely different take on Christmas, really. He modeled his St. Nicholas Santa Claus on a worker on his farm who was a Dutch man who had a little stubby pipe and was fat, and he was funny and jolly and all that stuff that we know of as Santa. And he didn't have the St. Nicholas with the rod for the bad kids and the promise of goodness for the good kids. He said his Santa at the end of the poem, as you probably remember, says, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all good night." And that was quite radical. That wasn't typical of the day. But his daughters loved it, and newspapers got hold of it and started reprinting it, and then it got reprinted more and more and more until finally it became almost a national event to have it printed in the paper. Charles Dickens, of course, wrote The Christmas Carol with Scrooge and Bob Cratchit and all that stuff. And there again was another move toward being generous and being kind and showing, in this case, being good to your employees. It's funny how Scrooge he brings the turkey and all that, but he never sits down with the employees and has dinner with them. That would be breaking social bonds too much. But he does provide them with all this food and things like that. So that's really, by the 1830s and 40s, that's when people in the Protestant arena started accepting Christmas as an event that was worth celebrating. And of course, the first symbol of Christmas is the Christmas tree. This, just to break the talk, this is a problem I've had with this book also, is how do you prioritize all the various facets of Christmas? So I'm just picking at random. There's tons more in the book, but Christmas trees began soon after the Protestant Christmas started. The first Christmas tree was said to be from Latvia in 1510, where they had a small tree and they decorated with roses to honor the Virgin Mary, and then they burned it, which seems to be a very common thing in Eastern Europe. I don't know why, they're always burning things. But the tree that we know today really comes from Germany, and it was said that it was allegedly started by Martin Luther himself. And the idea was that Martin Luther was out in the woods and had a vision of ecstasy, of religious ecstasy, and wanted to convey that to his children, the beauty of it. So he took a small tree into his house and he put candles on it and lit them, and had the light darkened to experience the beauty of Christmas itself. Nobody's quite sure if that's true, but what is true is that the trees in the early days started very small. They would just be tabletop Christmas trees. There was no big full-length thing like we have now. The first mention of a Christmas tree in Detroit was in the newspaper in 1852 in the Free Press. The Firemen's Hall benefits, they decorated small trees and then sold them as decorated trees to raise money for charity. In 1908, there were 15,000 trees sold in Detroit, so it was catching on very fast. 1910, 30,000 trees. In 1912, 75,000 trees. In the early days of these things, there were no Christmas tree farms, even though the very first one was in Detroit, or was in Michigan. But families up north would go out into the woods and chop down little trees, which were considered useless during those days. They would chop them down and then bundle them onto the wagons and send them down to Detroit to sell. They sold lots of them, as you can see. Today, about 25 to 30 million trees are sold every year, and about 10% of those come from Michigan. The problem with trees in the 19th century was they were extremely dangerous, really dangerous. I mean, a lot of the trees people bought were not fresh, perfect trees that you see nowadays. These were wild trees that people just chopped, and they could be very inconsistent or dried out, things like that. It's hard to do, but they would decorate trees with candles. In those days, they referred to them as tapers, which are long, elegant candles. They would fit them into a small tin cup and wire the cup onto the branch of the tree. That wasn't all they did, though. They then took mucilage, glue, and they smeared it all over the branches of the tree. And then they would take cotton batten and stick it onto the branches to look like snow, and then sprinkle little silver glitter on top of that.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Then they'd spritz it with gasoline. No, they would put that batten down on the base of the tree as well. On top of that, a lot of ornaments were made of celluloid, which was an early form of plastic. It was highly flammable. You know, celluloid is used in films. In the early days of filmmaking, they made films out of celluloid, and they were always catching fire. So they were using highly flammable celluloid ornaments, and then the ornaments were colored with aniline dye, which was purple. Victorians loved the dark purple color, and they dyed them, and when those caught fire, they created toxic fumes, and they sometimes exploded. So all in all, oh, and if that was enough, in the days before light bulbs, of course, people that had homes had illuminating gas was the way they could get light. And the illuminating gas came through small black brass tubes up near the ceiling that were arced upward with little jets on the end so that they could read. Well, that was perfect for roping pine roping on these things. So they would cover the whole room with the roping. And then when the kids came down for Christmas, the lights were out and the candles were all lit on the tree. And then Dad would, or somebody would turn up the gas like the angel of Christmas has just arrived. And they would be all lit up with all the walls. But sometimes it was more than lit up, it was ablaze. It was so dangerous. This is what the chief of police says: don't have a Christmas tree at all. The worst is that they go up like tinder once they get a good start. That was from 1909. I read several, more than 10 examples of fires at Christmas time. They always happen like at orphanages or a sorority or some awful thing. One poor man who was a judge, he had a Santa Claus suit on and a beard glued on. His beard caught on fire, and he's rolling around on the floor trying to put out his face, which is burning. Just like, oh my God, you know. But what killed all of this stuff was that the fire insurance company said, no more, this is ridiculous. People actually had big buckets of water next to their tree for emergency's sake. But no matter, the fire insurance said, we're not covering Christmas trees anymore. And from then on, it was pretty hard to do that, hard to light your tree with candles. There were alternatives. These were artificial trees that probably you recognize the one on the right. The one on the left was started in 1865. It's made of goose feathers. And they would dye goose feathers and glue them onto a wooden doll stuck into a trunk that was another wooden doll on a base. They were started by the German ornament companies. The German ornament companies were looking for ways to display their ornaments, you know, so they would make these dolls and they didn't have to mess with trees. But also in 1865, there were so many thousands of trees that were being cut down and sent to other countries out of Germany. Germany was going to put a moratorium on chopping down trees at Christmas time. And the ornament companies just about had heart failure. They had no trees, no ornaments. So what they did was they started selling these goose feather trees. And they were very popular at the turn of the century. And they came to the United States. And of course, we dyed them different colors. So there were white ones and yellow ones, and they were very fancy. But they were much safer than a regular tree in terms of candles, because the spacing of the branches was more logical, and you wouldn't have them overlapping. This, of course, is the aluminum tree. I don't know how many people ever grew up with aluminum trees. Yeah. I mean, it's the iconic tree from the ranch house in the 50s. There were no lights on it because they were short out. But they had a rotating color wheel below. And if you got a real fancy one, it actually rotated. It was so beautiful. That started in 1955 in Montauk, Wisconsin, and they sold millions of those trees. I mean, they were the thing. But in 1969, one show killed the aluminum tree. Does anybody have an idea what it might be? One show. And the whole thing went right down the sewer. It was Charlie Brown's Christmas. Yeah, and that one, as you remember, was Charlie Brown was sent out to get the biggest tree by the Krabby Girls, to go get the biggest tree possible, and he came back with a little wilty, real tree, and the message was, there's too much commercialization in Christmas. Yeah, Snoopy was a sales guy. He had a yard full of course. And but anyway, people got the message and they just stopped buying those trees. And you could buy them at a garage sale. They originally were selling for $25 or more, and then suddenly they were $2 at a garage sale. But I did check eBay. You can get one. It's in perfect shape, a pink one, and it's $4,000. If you want to relive the dream, it's going to cost you. Electric lights changed everything, of course. Electric lights came about in 1881. Edison's lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey, he decorated with strings of lights. He didn't call them Christmas lights, but people driving by, I guess, on the trains would see them. But a year later, one of his colleagues, a vice president, lived in New York City on Fifth Avenue, and he took a Christmas tree, a pine tree, and he had his technicians wire a set of lights for the tree. And they were red, white, and blue and strung around the tree. And he displayed it in his front window, and even had a thing to rotate the tree. And the New Yorkers said, oh, it's just a gimmick to sell light bulbs. And, but others, including Detroit, went and saw the tree and reported on it and became a sensation. It was really something. But originally it was very difficult because each light had to be wired separately. And to do a Christmas tree back in before 1900 cost $2,000 in those days. So only millionaires could do that. But in 1903, Edison sold the rights to the lights to GE, who then started creating pre-made strings of pre-wired sets of trees. And then by 1925, NOMA, the North American Manufacturing Association, formed from all the little light manufacturers. They formed one big one, and they were dominant for decades. In fact, until the 60s, when the Japanese came back with all those little glitter lights, and that's what killed the kind of the original lights. But if you want that Detroit look, you got to get a C9 NOMA line. It's those big hunky lights, so I think they're 15 watts each, that you see in bars that are around the mirrors and look so cool. Well, that's what you do. Uh-oh. this is Downtown Street. Downtown Street, of course, couldn't start until they had electric lights. The first one was in 1912. Mayor Oscar Marks was the mayor, and he had his little boy do the ceremonies of flipping on the switch and all that. In 1928, Santa arrived in a plane from Northville, from a company that made small planes in Northville, and he arrived with the plane for the lighting. And then in 1957, Soupy Sales, he hosted the first televised lighting with Fran Allison of Kukla, Fran and Ali. And then the following year, Soupy joined with Grosse Pointe's own Julie Harris, who was joined with Soupy to light the trees. But I could never imagine any two people so different than Julie Harris and Soupy Sales. She's the Emily Dickinson, and he's throwing pies at people. But anyway, I guess they made it. Thanksgiving Day Parade, America's Thanksgiving Day Parade in Detroit is almost 100 years old. I think the first one was in 1924. But it began really, the first one ever was in Toronto at Eaton's department store in 1905. And Hudson saw that and said, oh no, we got to do that. That's really cool. And but they didn't get around to it until 1924, when Albert B. Mills, who was in charge of public relations, convinced Hudson to put on this parade. And the first parade had 26 floats that were based on fairy tales, pulled by horse and wagon. They had 5 bands, and they had 1 elephant named Toto. And the first projection, the first radio broadcast of the parade was in 1931, and the first television show was in 1948. But the crowds didn't really get big. First they had 100,000 people and stuff, but they got into the 500,000, 750,000 in the 1950s. And today it's claimed 100 million people watch the parade on television. Which, the hardest jobs, almost all the jobs, there were like 1,300 jobs were held by Hudson employees. And it's very cute. They had a float, The Old Woman in the Shoe, and it was headed up from 1924 until like 1968 by the manager of the shoe department. This woman would be the woman in the shoe. I know it's really cool. But some of the hardest jobs were holding up these paper mache heads, which are made in Italy, which they still use. But they had to have really strong guys to do these heads, because if it was all windy, they were moving all over the place. The other thing is, I don't know if you can see it, but they look out the throat, and you can't really see anything other than what's directly in front of you. And so what they learned is they have to wear hunting boots, because before them were parades of horses. And they learned the hard way that it would be a nasty surprise if they didn't wear good shoes.
Details.
Yeah.
Now there's another thing about the parade that I learned, and maybe this is more common knowledge than I know, but there's always a substitute Santa in the parade. And the reason that is in Toronto, some years after 1905, the Santa had heart failure on the float. Yeah, and they had to stop it and take him down, and then there was nobody on the float, just an empty float. And Detroit says, oh no, we don't want that to happen. So what happens is before the parade starts, they drive a van out to Kirby Street at the start of the parade on Woodward, and Santa gets out of the front seat, waving to all the kids and people yelling, and climbs up on the float. And another Santa gets out the side of the van, sort of quietly and secretly sneaks over to the back of the float, opens a special door, and climbs in and sits on a bench with his feet up as the pavement goes by. And that's the guy that they call, okay, you're on, in case something happens to Santa. Well, in 1969, they were all set, rolling to go, and suddenly there was a bomb threat on the, somebody's going to bomb the Santa float. I mean, how low does that get? But that's what they were afraid of. So they stopped the float, and the guy inside said, all right, oh, this is big time. I'm finally going to get my chance. And he heard all these guys people rummaging around the car and the float, but nothing. And then suddenly the thing started again. They didn't find a bomb. And so they drove up to Hudson's, and Santa climbed off the float and got the key to the city. And then they took the float and zoomed it away over to Hudson's warehouse. They asked the guy, "Weren't you cold in there?" He says, "Oh, I was way too scared of a bomb to be cold." He did that for years. Of course, the purpose of the parade is to go see Santa. And Santa was on the 12th floor, Santa Land. It's just amazing to read the recollections of these men that played Santa. It's just astounding. One man, Fred Husman, was a security guard at Macomb Community College. He had white hair and bright blue eyes. He had a jolly look, they said. But he would get in his Volkswagen Beetle. He lived on Harvard Street on the east side, and he would drive downtown to Hudson's and Park. Then he would go up to the 12th floor and through this labyrinth of hallways until he would get to this back room, which was called the Santa Room. And they had 10 Santas. There's no children here, right? This is my problem. They had 10 Santas in various stages of dress and undress, and they're eating donuts and chatting. And he said it was a privilege to play Santa. It was just a joy for him. He really was sad when Christmas was over. But they would have, you had a head Santa who would enforce the rules: no cigarette smoking on breaks, or cigars or something, or having a beer. Santa had to smell good at least. If not look good, he had to smell good. But Husman they would go for 1 hour, and that was about all they could take. It was fairly intense. And then they would go back to the Santa room and take a break and come back. But they would see nearly 500,000, I'm sorry, 250,000 kids a year at the Hudson's alone. You think about that. And in 1970, they had the first black Santa. And they kept him in the first year in a separate room, and they didn't tell anyone that there was a black Santa. But they were, for whatever reason, they were very cautious. But the parent would have to ask for a black Santa before they let a child go to see the Santa. So the Santa basically just sat there and twiddled his thumbs for the whole Christmas season. But soon after, the year after, they let people know that there was that. And he saw many of these people. His name, his name was Albert Gagner, and he was from Georgia. He came up to Detroit, worked in the tire plants. He was a very big man. He was very tall and heavy set. And he was also the minister or the preacher at his Baptist church, and he was a Boy Scout leader. He was generally a good guy. He was well loved, his wife said, as a Santa Claus, and remembered for many years. Here are the kids waiting to go see Santa on the 12th floor during Christmas. Now, if you couldn't see Santa at Hudson's, you could go to the Rotunda to see Santa. I don't know if anybody went to the Rotunda. I remember going there, yeah. Here's the rabbit lighting the Rotunda on fire, which is kind of that's a bad image. He's actually lighting candles. Yeah, the Rotunda was pretty spectacular out in Dearborn. Here's the huge trees they have up there, and they always had dolls on display that from the Goodfellows, they would decorate the dolls and put them on display in the Rotunda. And here the kids are lined way up and over to the North Pole to go see Santa Claus. And there's the fire. That was in 1962. This is something I really enjoyed, and that was reading old Christmas letters from children in the 19th century. And I have a few of them here I'll read to you. This is from 1898 from Katie Keel in Springwells. She says, "Dear Santa, I thought I would write you a little letter about what I want for Christmas. I want a big doll and a buggy and a pair of new shoes and some candy and nuts and a new ring. but a little ring, for I'm little. But I wish you would come early in the morning. I am 10 years old, but I am very little. I will hang up my stocking Christmas night when I go to bed. I wish you would bring me a pair of skates. Slips that in there. Here's another one from 1893. Dear Santa Claus, please bring me a doll for Christmas, and I want you to bring me a nice pair of gloves for Christmas, and please bring me a nice little cat on wheels for Christmas, and I want you to bring me a nice picture book, and I want you to bring a nice little dog on wheels for Christmas. I want you to get me a nice little box for Christmas, and I want you to bring me a nice set of dishes for Christmas, and I want you to give me a nice little basket. So she's going to have a nice little Christmas. That's Ella Jordan. Now, some of the stories are sad, I mean really sad. This one was from 1892. My dear Santa Claus, 5 of us, all from the asylum, are at the Scarlet Fever House, and we will not be able to leave here before Christmas. So we thought we'd let you know where we were, for this is such a lonely place, you might pass us by. So if you're not afraid of catching scarlet fever, come this way and you will find our stockings all hung up and waiting for you. We don't want very much this year because we could not take it back with us. So dear Santa Claus, you can bring us whatever you have left after you've been to all the little boys and girls. That's from Emma Aldrich, age 7 at the Scarlet Fever House in Harper Hospital. I know, isn't that's a killer. Now, some of them were really bad, and there would be something done about it. Like this one, dear Santa Claus, we never had a good Christmas yet. My mother needs shoes, a dress, and some underwear, and we would like to have something good to eat. I have no shoes or stockings. You know. So what would happen, like in 1986, of course much later, but this woman, Joyce Williamson, was a letter carrier, and but she had an operation before Christmas, so she could do no heavy lifting, really. So they asked her if she wanted to play Santa and respond to letters that kids sent to the post office. She said, oh, absolutely, it'd be great. So she had 2 helpers. They had a standard letter, but when they got a really bad letter, such like this one, they could check the code, the cancellation code, and know what neighborhood it was from. They would have the postman of that thing go out and check on the family to see if they were actually okay. And then the postal people would adopt these families and bring stuff for them, you know, presents and food and stuff like that, which the post letter carrier would bring to the family. So it was very sweet. Then, of course, toys. This sweet little girl with her toys. The king of toys in Detroit was Louis Rabot. Louis was from Belgium. He was of Belgian descent. He was born in Detroit. His mother actually started a shop on Jefferson Avenue where she sold lace and made lace and sold lace. And Louis worked with her. But later he moved away from lace into toys and then fireworks and all kinds of fun stuff, you know. But Louis was considered the king of toys and is frequently interviewed in the free press over the years about what's the new thing. In the 19th century, in the beginning, of course, people didn't buy toys. They just made the toys, or they got them at the church bazaar or something like that. They were homemade toys. Store-bought toys were way too expensive. Like a doll would be from Germany, would have real human hair, you know, china for a face, porcelain, and things like that. And they were very expensive. There was one record I read where a little girl's father, who was a blacksmith, bought her one of those German dolls. And she was so proud of it. And she put it in her bedroom in the window. And then one day, to her horror, after a day, the sun had beaten down and melted the wax face and destroyed the doll. Yeah, she was crushed. But generally, toys were meant they were marketed to parents, and they were meant to improve the children. So the girl toys were always dolls or kitchenette or, you know, that kind of thing. And the boys' toys were always guns and whips and things to torment their siblings, but also mechanical toys. And in Hudson's, they were so complicated, these mechanical toys, that the clerks and the people that waited on had the little boys come in and explain how these things worked. It was like the early days of the computer, you know. Nobody knew what was going on. The 20th century was completely different, as we know, having been there. They began marketing toys directly to kids. And Louis Rabot said the first fad, there was the beginning of toy fads. And the first toy fad was teddy bears that he knew of. And he said, you look out and every little kid in the world was holding one of these huge bears. And this was during Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, you know. But toys were marketed directly to kids. In 1955, Davy Crockett, they sold 10 million Davy Crockett caps. And the hula hoop, which came out in the early 60s, was originally in Australia. It was made of bamboo, and the fellow, I don't know his name, but the fellow went down there and saw this, and came back and said, we're making this out of plastic. And they sold 25 million in 4 months. You know, that was unheard of any time before the 20th century. And Fisher-Price was the first company to make all plastic toys. Up until then, it were sheet metal or cardboard or wood, things like that. But the people liked the toys. They were durable and colorful, but the manufacturers loved the plastic toys because suddenly they could make them much faster. It was much easier to make blow-molded plastic toys than it was to print a lithograph onto a sheet metal and fold it into a fortress or something like that for a kid. So toy sales soared from 84 million in 1940 to 1.5 billion in 1960. So they were a really big deal. I'm going to end with a little description of some of the Christmas charity that started in Detroit. The Salvation Army, I don't know what happened to the picture.
The red kettle, yeah.
Yeah, the red kettle is good enough, but anyway. It started in Great Britain in the 1860s, and if you know, the Salvation Army was modeled after an army. They had ranks, people were ranked, and they had officers and all that kind of stuff. And they wore uniforms. And when they came to Detroit in the early days, descriptions, they would hold revival meetings, but they were despised by the established religious groups in New York and in Great Britain. These were people that were, many illiterate, they were working class people and things like that. So they made great fun of these people, and they put up with untold stuff. They would have a revival meeting, and suddenly there would be these drunken hoodlums, and they'd start these brawls. And I mean, they were punching ladies, and it was just a mad scene. And then the police would come in swinging billy clubs, and this went on for a while. But then they got it together, and people saw that they were actually accomplishing things. And by 1895, they were serving 1,000 dinners a day downtown Detroit, for free, of course. And then in the 1930s, by 30s, they were distributed 3,000 gift baskets to needy kids. So their popularity grew a lot. In Detroit, in Paradise Valley, on the Near East Side, the Black District, and Black Bottom, which was below Gratiot, south of Gratiot. Paradise Valley, of course, is a commercial district. They did a lot of Christmas charity in Paradise Valley. It began really with Joe Louis, who in 1935 had the Joe Louis Boosters Club, and he gave a major Christmas show in Paradise Valley for children and gave out bushels of food and clothing for the poor.
Can you mention, he was the heavyweight champion boxer for the students that are here?
Yeah, all right.
That's how Joe Louis was?
He was an internationally famous boxer from Detroit and a hero in Detroit at the time. Another character, Sonny Wilson, I really recommend his book. It's really a fun read. Sonny Wilson in the mid-30s was, Paradise Valley always had an unofficial mayor of Paradise Valley. And Sonny Wilson was that. And he owned a club in Paradise Valley called the Forest Club, which he claimed and others said the same was bigger than Madison Square Garden. It was just gargantuan. And he had basketball courts, and he had a roller skating rink in the place. And he would open it up to kids, and by the thousands they would come in and get presents and go roller skating and stuff like that. And this last man too, Roy H. Lightfoot, was also from Paradise Valley, and he owned drugstores and clubs, and he also gave away Christmas gifts and baskets to residents. He was a very popular figure there. Finally, the Goodfellows, which is a Detroit begun club for Christmas charity. This is their famous painting or drawing that originated in the Detroit News. It's called Forgotten. I don't know if you can see, it's a little girl in despair. But the Goodfellows was started by James Brady in 1914. He was born in Corktown in 1878, one of 8 children. His father owned a small grocery store, and when he was a child, his mother died, and his father raised the entire family from just the proceeds of this grocery store. It's just astounding when you hear about this. But he raised them all. Of course, the kids just didn't sit around and watch cartoons. They had to get out and work. And that's what Brady did. He sold newspapers on the streets, hustled newspapers. And in 1914, after he'd become a success as an adult, he worked for Ari Ohl's company, and he was a very, very successful businessman. He called back all his old newsboys and said, let's go, now they were all adults, of course, let's go out and sell papers for charity. So he put his own money into it to start with, and it paid back 5 times as much, so he was delighted about this. And he began the Goodfellows Club, which serves tens of thousands of people. And a good friend of mine, his father was a judge in Detroit, and he himself sold newspapers for the Goodfellows at Shelby and Michigan Avenue. Later, after he died, my friend said, let's do that here. So he got all his cousins together, and they still are down there selling newspapers at the corner. But his father told him, if you're going to do this, the first thing I want you to do is go to the warehouse and watch the children pick up the toys that are given to them from us. So he did that. He went down to the Goodfellows warehouse and sat, and a little girl came in with her mother. They had to show that they are enrolled in school, and the little girl looked over at one of the dolls and said, can I take this? Is this for me? He said, yep, go right ahead. It's all for you. And she goes, well, thank you. And that was, to me, just a beautiful example of what this is all about. And so with that, I'm going to say good night. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer your questions.